My son was just walking home from school, backpack bouncing, humming his little song, when a fake OA officer jumped out of a golf cart, gun already in his hand. "Hands up, kid," he screamed. My boy froze. He's only 10. He didn't even understand what he did wrong. The man kept getting closer, shaking, pointing the gun like he was some action hero. But he didn't know one thing. The terrified child he pulled a weapon on, the boy he tried to intimidate, was the son of a Navy SEAL who had just stepped out of the truck behind him. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe for more stories where the bad guys always regret their choices. My son was just walking home from school the same way he always did, with his backpack bouncing lightly against his shoulders and his sneakers kicking up little puffs of dust from the sidewalk. He was humming his favorite tune, completely unaware of how quickly a peaceful afternoon could turn into a nightmare. The sun was warm, the street was quiet, and everything looked safe, at least safe enough for a 10-year-old boy who had never truly seen evil up close. He was too young to understand danger, too young to know that sometimes the real monsters don't hide under beds. They walk openly in daylight, wearing badges they don't deserve. And then a sound cut through the calm, sharp and violent. A golf cart screeched onto the sidewalk, tires dragging across concrete, as if whoever was driving didn't care who or what they hit. My son stopped walking. His humming faded. His shoulders stiffened in instinctive fear. A man jumped out of the cart like he had been waiting for this moment. He wore a dark tactical vest with HOA security stitched across the front in oversized letters, the kind that look official from a distance but fall apart when you get close enough to see the cheap stitching. A silver badge hung crookedly on his chest, flimsy, reflective, fake, a prop for a role he desperately wanted to believe he was qualified to play. But the worst part wasn't the uniform. It was the gun. He yanked a black handgun from his belt and pointed it straight at my son's head. "Hands up, kid," he barked, his voice cracking with the adrenaline of someone who wanted to feel powerful. My son froze like the world had suddenly turned to ice. His hands lifted slowly, trembling in the air, and his little voice broke as he tried to speak. What did I do?" He was terrified, and yet he didn't even take a step back. That's how innocent he still was. He believed adults, even scary ones, still had some sense of fairness. But this man didn't. He didn't answer my boy. He didn't even blink. He stepped closer, gripping the gun tighter, his jaw clenched as if he enjoyed watching fear take root in a child's eyes. To him, this was power. To him, pointing a weapon at a 10-year-old was some kind of victory. He had no idea how big of a mistake he was making, because the child he was threatening, the boy he believed he could intimidate, scare, dominate, was my son. And I wasn't just any father. I wasn't just a man running late from work or someone distracted by daily life. I was a Navy SEAL, a man trained to stay alive in hell, to recognize threats before they strike, to act without hesitation, and to protect the innocent, especially my family. I had seen enemies with real weapons and real intent, and this clown in a fake vest didn't even come close, but he was holding a gun to my son's head. And that meant he had already crossed a line he could never uncross. I happened to be pulling into our street at that exact moment. I saw the cart, the uniform, the gun. Then I saw my boy, hands up, fear etched across his face. I don't remember parking the truck. I don't remember opening the door. My training took over long before my feet hit the pavement. Every muscle in my body locked into focus, narrowing the world into one single mission: neutralize the threat and reach my son alive. The fake officer didn't notice me yet. His attention was fixed entirely on a trembling child, barking out nonsense about HOA rules and trespassing, as if any of it justified pointing a loaded weapon at a minor. He kept shouting things like, "You're on restricted HOA property, and kids need permission to walk here." Lies. All of it. But lies were the least of his crimes. My son's breathing turned shallow, his eyes starting to water, and seeing that nearly shattered the part of me that still believed people like this wouldn't hurt a child. I stepped closer, quiet, calculating the angle, the distance, the timing, every factor that determined how quickly I could remove that weapon from the equation. 3 seconds. That's all I needed, 3 seconds to end this, but before I made my move, my son saw me, and when his eyes met mine, something changed inside him. The fear didn't vanish, but he stood straighter, like he knew he wasn't alone anymore, like he knew I would reach him no matter what stood in the way. The man saw his shift in posture and turned slightly, confused, and that's when he finally noticed me approaching. He blinked twice, his grip faltered. His confidence wavered, because even fake officers can sense when they've made a fatal mistake. I stared directly at him, my voice cold and steady. Step away from my son. He raised the gun higher in panic, pointing it between both of us now, but he was already too late. He didn't know who he was facing. He didn't know what I was capable of. And he didn't know that he had just stepped into a fight he could never win. My son's small hands were still raised, fingers trembling uncontrollably as the fake HOA officer continued barking orders at him like he was some criminal mastermind instead of a terrified 10-year-old child walking home from school. His little chest rose and fell too quickly, too shallowly, the way children breathe when they're trying desperately not to cry. The officer towered over him, chest puffed out, pretending he was performing some heroic act, completely blind to the truth that he was committing a felony in broad daylight. But bullies rarely recognize themselves. They see fear and think it means respect. Neighbors watch from behind their blinds, silhouettes glued to windows, afraid to step outside. Everyone knew this man. He wasn't OA security, not officially. He was a volunteer who took it too far, a wannabe authority figure who desperately craved power in a place where he had none. He fined people for leaving trash cans out too long. He threatened to shut down garage sales, and he once tried to write a citation to an elderly man for feeding birds. But pointing a gun at a child? That was something none of us imagined he'd ever do. Yet here we were. He leaned closer to my son, voice deep and shaky, the kind of voice that trembles not from fear, but from the thrill of feeling superior. "You think you can trespass on HOA property? You think kids get to break rules?" he shouted, waving the gun like a baton. "Answer me." My son couldn't even open his mouth. His lips trembled too violently. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, clinging there, refusing to fall because he was trying to be brave, trying to be strong, trying not to disappoint me, even though he wasn't the one doing anything wrong. From where I stood behind my truck door, I saw everything with a clarity most people never experience. SEAL training is like flipping a switch, one that turns you from a person into a weapon. My eyes calculated distances automatically, 9 feet between me and the officer, 1.5 seconds to close the gap, 2 seconds if he turned with the gun raised. I analyzed the angle of his wrist, the positioning of his feet, the trembling of his trigger finger. He wasn't stable. He wasn't trained. He was dangerous because he didn't understand danger at all. The moment he took another step toward my son, pressing the barrel so near my child's face that the metal reflected in my boy's teary eyes, my heart clenched in a way I hadn't felt since combat. It wasn't panic. It was something carnal, sharper, older. The instinct to protect. The instinct that rises inside every parent but hits like a storm inside a SEAL. Everything in my body narrowed to a single purpose: neutralize the threat and extract my child safely. I moved out of the truck quietly, closing the door without sound. I stayed low, breathing slow, keeping my footsteps silent on the pavement. He didn't hear me. He was too busy lecturing a terrified child about respecting HOA boundaries, like he was reciting lines from a fantasy script, using words he barely understood. "You kids think the rules don't apply to you," he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "This sidewalk is HOA managed. That means I have the right to stop you." No, he didn't. He had no authority at all, but lies are easier to believe when you shout them loudly enough. My son tried to speak through the fear. I was just going home." "Shut up," the man snapped, waving the gun again. "Don't talk back." The rage that rose inside me nearly blurred my vision. I wanted to sprint toward him right then, rip the gun from his trembling hand, and throw him onto the pavement. But training held me back. There's a right moment to act. Too early and the gun might go off. Too late and the damage is done. So I waited. I watched the man's shoulders, his elbow, his breathing. His emotional voltage was high, too high. He wanted a reaction. He wanted someone to fear him. He wanted to prove something, and that made him unstable. My son's lip quivered again. He whispered, "Please, don't hurt me." And that was the moment the world snapped. The officer lifted the gun higher, pointing it directly at my son's forehead. His voice dropped to a low, husky snarl. I said, "Hands up higher, don't make me—" He didn't finish because I spoke. My voice didn't echo. It didn't crack. It didn't shake. It was calm, level, and cold enough to freeze the entire street. Put the gun down. The man jerked around so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. His eyes widened when he saw me standing there, posture steady, shoulders squared, controlled and deadly. He hadn't heard me approach. That alone scared him. Civilians don't move like that. Civilians don't appear out of nowhere. Civilians don't stare with that slow, unblinking intensity. His grip faltered just for a second, but enough for his wrist to shake. "Be back up," he stuttered. "This is an HOA operation." I stepped closer. "No," I said. "This is a crime scene." He swallowed hard, glancing between me and my son, suddenly unsure of how much trouble he was in. He was trespassing on HOA property. Kids can't walk here without clearance. I stared at him. "Sidewalks belong to the county," I said quietly, "not the HOA. And I don't know what kind of fantasy badge you're wearing, but you don't have authority to stop anyone." His jaw tightened. I do now." "No," I said again, stepping forward. "You don't." He tried raising the gun again, but his hands were shaking too much. My son whimpered, stumbling backward. Seeing that made something in me break. This man had one chance to walk away alive, one chance to realize he was outmatched, one chance to lower his weapon. He didn't take it. The street fell silent, dead silent, waiting for the explosion that was about to come, and I was done waiting. Fake cop or not, nobody points a gun at my son. Not in my neighborhood, not in my country, not while I'm breathing. The moment that trembling barrel aimed at my child's forehead, something deep inside me shifted. The world narrowed into a tunnel, sounds dulled, colors sharpened. Every instinct I had built through years of training, years of missions, years of staring danger in the face, rose to the surface like a wave crashing over everything else. I moved forward slowly, not because I W as unsure, but because I needed the perfect angle, the perfect distance, the perfect second to strike. One wrong move could make that gun fire, and I would never risk my son's life on speed instead of precision. My boots hit the pavement without a sound. My breathing stayed low and controlled. My eyes never left the man's shaking wrist. And finally, at just the right distance, I spoke. My voice didn't yell. It didn't rise. It came out cold, direct, and razor sharp, exactly the tone that stops grown men in their tracks. "Put the gun down." The fake officer whipped around so fast he nearly lost his balance. The gun jerked in his hand, pointing toward me, then toward my son again, then back to me. He was sweating now, the confidence draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug from his chest. He thought he was confronting a helpless kid. He never expected to face a man like me. "Be back up," he shouted, trying to steady his voice. "This is HOA business. Stay out of it." Wrong answer, a catastrophically wrong answer. I took another step toward him. My posture didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't shout. That wasn't necessary. The danger radiated off me in a way he could feel, not see. SEAL training does that to a man. We learn how to fight with presence before we even lift a hand. "You point a weapon at my boy again," I said quietly, "and you won't walk away from this." His eyes widened. He wasn't expecting calm. He expected fear. He wanted fear. Without it, he didn't know what to do. I'm in charge here," he snapped, voice cracking. "You don't tell me what to do. I run this neighborhood. I enforce the rules." He shouted louder, as if volume could turn delusion into reality. My son took advantage of the distraction. He bolted toward me, stumbling over his own feet in panic. I caught him just as he reached me, pulling him behind my side shield. Ing him with my body, he clung to my shirt, fingers digging into the fabric, breathing like he had sprinted miles. I held him with one arm, keeping my eyes locked on the man with the gun. "You think you can threaten us?" the man yelled, trying to puff up again. "I have authority. I make the calls around here." He had no idea what he was speaking into existence. I took another slow, deliberate step. My shirt lifted just enough as I moved to reveal the tattoo etched into my ribs. Sharp lines, battle earned, pain earned, blood earned. The trident, the emblem every Navy SEAL earns through the hardest training on the planet. You don't get that ink for fun. You get it when you've survived hell. His eyes dropped to the tattoo. His entire expression changed. You're military? He stammered. I shook my head once, slowly. Worse, I said. I'm a SEAL. And you just threatened my child. It was like the words punched the air out of him. His shoulders dropped. His hand trembled harder. The gun dipped just half an inch, but half an inch was enough. Enough to tell me his confidence was broken. Enough to tell me he knew exactly how badly he had messed up. Enough to tell me he wasn't prepared for the man standing in front of him. His eyes darted around desperately, looking for witnesses, for support, for any sign he wasn't alone. But curtains were open now. Neighbors were watching, and not one of them stepped outside to defend him. Not one person backed up his authority. Not one believed the lie he had been hiding behind. His voice fell to a whimper. I was just enforcing rules. I didn't know. Didn't know what? I asked. Didn't know pointing a gun at a kid is a felony? Didn't know impersonating an officer is a crime? Didn't know you picked the wrong child? He swallowed hard. He didn't finish because I stepped in. I moved with precision, speed, and control. Left hand snapped toward his wrist, twisting sharply, angling the gun away from everyone. My right arm pushed against his elbow, breaking his stance, forcing his body weight forward. The gun fell from his weakened grip, clattering onto the pavement. Before he could react, I pivoted, using his own momentum to send him stumbling into the side of his golf cart. His face smacked the metal frame. He yelped like a kick dog. I didn't punch him. I didn't hit him. I didn't need to. The technique was enough. The humiliation was enough. The pain was enough. He staggered back, clutching his face. You attacked me. You assaulted an officer. I raised an eyebrow. Officer? You're wearing a pre-printed vest and a shiny toy badge. You threatened a child with a real firearm. You're lucky you're still conscious. He tried puffing up again, but his voice shook. I run this neighborhood. I'm in charge here. Not anymore, I said. I kicked the gun toward the curb far from his reach. My son stayed behind my leg, peeking out with wide, frightened eyes. The fake officer stared at the tattoo again, stared at my stance, stared at the gun now lying out of his reach. And in that moment, he finally understood something he had never understood before. Authority isn't a vest. It isn't a badge. It isn't a title. It's the ability to protect, to defend, to act when it matters. And he had none of that. Not anymore, not ever, because he had just faced a Navy SEAL, and the consequences were only beginning. The fake officer stood frozen for half a second, his eyes darting between me, the gun on the ground, and the curtain-lined windows of the houses around us. That half second was all I needed. In a real fight, a half second is the difference between survival and tragedy. In my world, it's practically an eternity. My muscles tightened, my breathing steadied, and every ounce of training I had ever received surged forward like a reflex buried deep in my bones. He lunged for the gun. That was a mistake, a huge one. Before his fingers even brushed the pavement, I stepped in. My hand clamped around his wrist with precision and force, twisting it inward, locking the joint so firmly he let out a scream that cracked through the entire cul-de-sac. His legs buckled, his body bent forward. The gun tumbled away again, sliding across the asphalt until it stopped beneath a bush. He swung wildly at me with his free hand, not because he had technique, but because he was desperate. A desperate man is predictable. He moved like someone who had seen fights only on television. Big gestures, no balance, no awareness. I dodged easily, stepping to the side, redirecting his momentum with a twist of my hips. His fist cut through empty air, and the force spun him around just enough for me to guide him directly into the hood of his own golf cart. His face smashed against the windshield with a flat, humiliating thud. A crack streaked across the glass, spreading like a spider web. His scream echoed down the street. "You broke my arm!" he yelled, even though his arm was still perfectly intact. People like him always exaggerate pain, yet they never hesitate to cause it. "Stop moving," I commanded. He moved anyway. He flailed, kicking backward, trying to elbow me, thrashing like a child throwing a tantrum in a store aisle. But every move he made only tightened the hold I had on him. My knee pressed into the back of his thigh. My forearm pinned between his shoulder blades, and his breath came out in short, pained bursts against the cracked windshield. "Let me go," he shrieked. "You're assaulting a federal officer." "Fake badge," I said, grabbing the shiny plastic emblem clipped to his vest. I ripped it off and tossed it into the grass. "Fake authority, real consequences." He froze. N-O-T because he understood, but because his brain had run out of excuses to hide behind. He had nothing left to shout, nothing left to threaten, nothing left to stand on. He was just a man who had crossed every line and suddenly realized it. By now, neighbors had stepped outside. The entire street had been silent moments earlier, but now whispers swirled like wind. Finally, he deserves this. He pointed a gun at a child. This was bound to happen. One neighbor, the elderly man from 2 houses down, shook his head and muttered, told the board this would happen. Nobody listened. Another mother clutched her toddler close to her chest, eyes wide with shock but also relief. He tried to stop my daughter last week, she whispered. Said she couldn't ride her scooter past his yard. Everyone had a story. Everyone had suffered because of this man's delusion of power. And now, with his face mashed against the windshield, they finally saw the bully for what he truly was, weak, insecure, and dangerous when unchecked. Behind me, my son stood close, hands still trembling. His breath came in small hiccups, like he was trying to swallow his fear and be brave. His eyes were wide, locked on me, as if watching me control the situation was the only thing keeping him grounded. "Dad?" he whispered. I turned my head slightly, keeping the fake officer firmly pinned. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now." He nodded quickly, wiping his face with his sleeve, trying not to cry. But he didn't need to hide it. He'd been staring down the barrel of a gun 5 minutes ago. Crying would have been the most human reaction in the world. The fake officer continued to squirm. "You can't do this. You can't touch me. I'll sue. I'll call the HOA president. You're dead. Do you hear me? Dead." I leaned closer, lowering my voice into something quiet, almost calm but colder than steel. "You pointed a loaded gun at my son," I said. "There is nothing you can threaten me with that compares to that." He stopped struggling, not because he suddenly respected what I said, but because he could hear the truth in it. His threats bounced off me like foam. His power had evaporated the moment the gun left his hand. "Help! Somebody help me!" he cried, looking toward the neighbors. But no one moved, not one adult, not one teenager, not even the dog barking behind a fence. Everyone stood still because everyone knew exactly who needed help, and it wasn't him. From somewhere down the block came the distant echo of sirens, real ones this time, deep, steady, confident. The sound rolled through the street like a promise that justice was finally on its way. The fake officer squirmed once more. "Do you hear that? They're coming for you." I didn't even blink. "No," I said, "they're coming for you." His breath hitched. For the first time since this began, he understood. He wasn't the hunter. He wasn't the authority. He wasn't the hero of his own fantasy. He was the criminal, the wannabe, the coward. This entire time, he thought my son was the easiest target, someone he could scare, someone he could dominate, someone helpless. He didn't realize that child had a father trained to face real danger, real enemies, real warfare. And this man, he wasn't even a warm-up. As the sirens grew louder, my grip remained steady. My son stayed behind me, and the neighborhood watched, knowing they were witnessing the moment the man who had terrorized them finally faced the one person he never should have provoked, a Navy SEAL. The distant sirens grew louder, rolling through the quiet neighborhood like a warning bell. The fake HOA officer, pinned against his cracked golf cart windshield, stopped struggling the moment he heard them. His body stiffened beneath my grip. For the first time since this began, fear replaced a arrogance in his eyes. Not fear of me, not fear of the neighborhood watching him unravel, but fear of the real consequences rushing toward him with flashing lights and uniforms he could never pretend to belong to. My son stood behind me, clutching my shirt, peeking out just enough to see what was happening. I kept my hand steady on the fake officer's shoulder blade, applying just enough pressure to keep him in place without harming him more than necessary. I didn't need to break him. Life would do that soon enough. 3 squad cars turned onto our street, their tires crunching slowly over the pavement. Lights flashing but sirens fading as they approached the scene. These weren't HOA volunteers. These weren't neighborhood watch amateurs. These were real law enforcement officers, trained, alert, and immediately aware that something serious was unfolding. As the first officer stepped out of his car, his hand instinctively dropped to his holster, though he didn't draw. His eyes scanned everything: me, my son, the golf cart, the twisted wrist of the impersonator, the gun lying near the bushes. Within seconds, he understood exactly what kind of mess they were stepping into. Another officer approached from the opposite side, carefully keeping distance as protocol demanded. "Sir," he called out to me, voice steady. "Release him slowly." "We'll take it from here." I nodded, easing my grip, but staying close enough to react if the man tried something reckless, though. It was clear he no longer had any fight left in him. He collapsed onto his knees as soon as I let him go, his hands shaking violently, his breathing rapid and full of panic. He looked up at the officers like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. "Oh, thank God you're here," he cried, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "He attacked me. He assaulted an officer. He's dangerous." The officers didn't move. They didn't look at me like I was a threat. They didn't reach for their weapons. They didn't believe a single word coming out of his mouth. Instead, the lead officer crouched beside him, grabbing his fake badge between two fingers. He lifted the shiny emblem, inspected it, then scoffed softly as he tossed it back onto the ground. "We've been looking for you," the officer said. The fake cop blinked. "Me?" "Yes," the officer replied quietly. "Impersonating law enforcement, false detainment, threatening residents, extorting fines. And now—" His eyes cut to the gun lying in the bushes, pointing a loaded firearm at a minor. The man flinched like he had been slapped. "It wasn't loaded. Well, it was, but he scared me. I didn't know. He's 10 years old," the officer said flatly. "And that man," he pointed directly at me, "saved your life by disarming you before you did something you could never undo." My son clung tighter to my side. The officer softened his expression for a moment and nodded to him gently. "You're safe now, buddy." Then the arrest began. 2 officers pulled the impersonator to his feet. He yelped dramatically, whining as if they were hurting him, though they barely touched him. As they guided his hands behind his back, he shouted again, "I didn't know he was a SEAL." All movement on the street seemed to pause for a breath. Neighbors who had gathered outside murmured among themselves, eyes widening. Even the officers glanced at me with renewed understanding, not fear, but respect. SEAL training isn't something you announce. It's something people feel, something they recognize when they see how you stand, how you move, how you handle danger. "You didn't need to know," I said calmly. The fake officer turned toward me, face crumpled in panic and shame. "You just needed," I continued, "to not pick up that gun." His knees nearly buckled. The officers had to steady him. "Sir," the lead officer said to him, voice firm but controlled, "you are under arrest for multiple charges, including impersonation, assault with a deadly weapon, brandishing a firearm, and endangering a minor." The man broke down completely. "No, please, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know he belonged to a soldier. I didn't know." The officer stared at him, unimpressed. "You pointed a gun at a child. Doesn't matter who his father is. What matters is what you did." The weight of that truth wiped the last bit of fight out of him. He sagged into the officer's arms as they tightened the cuffs around his wrists. He blinked through tears, looking around as if expecting someone, anyone, to defend him. But no one stepped forward, because everyone saw everything. Everyone saw him threaten an innocent boy. Everyone saw his lies. Everyone saw his cowardice. And everyone saw him fall apart the moment real authority arrived. The officers guided him toward their squad car, but he dug his heels into the ground one last time, pointing desperately at me. "He attacked me. Arrest him too. He's dangerous. He's trained. The officer cut him off sharply. "He saved a child's life, which is more than you can say." Silence rippled across the street. My son's hand, still wrapped in my shirt, loosened slightly. I knelt down and looked him in the eyes. "You okay, bud?" He nodded shakily. "Yeah, because you came." I pulled him into a firm hug, steadying myself. My hands were still tense, still ready, still wired from the adrenaline. But my son's heartbeat against my chest grounded me again. "You're safe," I whispered. "No one will ever hurt you while I'm here." The officers approached me next. One extended his hand. "Thank you. If you hadn't stepped in when you did, this could have ended very differently." I shook his hand. "I did what any father would do." "No, he corrected gently. "You did what a trained professional would do. And you probably saved that man from getting himself killed." I glanced at the fake officer, now slumped in the back of the squad car, head bowed, face streaked with tears. He didn't look powerful anymore. He didn't look brave. He didn't even look angry. He just looked small. The officer added, "We'll file the report. You'll need to give a statement later, but for now, take your son home." I nodded. The officers drove away. The neighbors slowly dispersed. The street fell quiet again. Except this time, the quiet didn't feel dangerous. It felt safe. The moment the squad cars disappeared around the corner, the entire neighborhood seemed to breathe again. A weight that had been pressing on everyone's shoulders for months, maybe years, finally lifted. It was as if the sky brightened, the air warmed, and the street itself relaxed. People stepped outside their houses slowly, carefully, as though they weren't quite sure the danger was truly gone. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some whispered to one another. Some simply stood and stared, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Fake authority had finally been confronted by real authority, and for the first time, justice didn't feel distant. It felt present, alive, standing right there on our street. My son still held onto me tightly, his small fingers clutching the back of my shirt like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. His little body trembled from leftover adrenaline, from fear, from relief. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. His eyes were red, glossy, still recovering from the terror of moments earlier. Seeing him like that did something to me. It shook me deeper than any mission ever had. I'd faced armed insurgents, explosive traps, ambushes in the dark, but nothing compared to the fear of seeing a gun pointed at my child's head. "Dad," he whispered, voice small and fragile. Am I safe now?" I pulled him into my arms, holding him tightly. "You're safe," I said. "I promise you." Neighbors approached tentatively. Some thanked me, some apologized for not intervening. Some admitted they had been just as afraid of the fake officer as my son had been. The truth was simple. Bullies thrive when good people feel powerless. Today, the neighborhood saw what power looks like when it belongs to someone who doesn't abuse it. Mrs. Daniels, the elderly neighbor who always grew roses, touched my arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "He threatened my grandson last month. Told him he'd issue a citation for playing too loudly. We didn't know how to stop him," another neighbor added. "He had everyone scared. We all felt trapped." A man from 3 houses down stepped forward. "It shouldn't have taken this long. We should have spoken up. We should have pushed back. I'm sorry we didn't." I shook my head. "Fear makes people freeze. What matters is what you do once the fear breaks." They nodded, understanding more in those words than I intended to say. Later that day, after the street cleared and the chaos faded, I sat with my son inside the house. He was quiet, his fingers tracing patterns on the couch cushion, his thoughts clearly swirling with everything he'd witnessed. Finally, he looked up at me and asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Dad, would you have protected me even if he wasn't fake, even if he had real authority?" The innocence in his voice nearly broke me. He wasn't asking about the tattoos on my ribs or the training I carried. He wasn't asking about rules or badges or authority. He was asking whether I, his father, would always stand between him and danger, no matter who or what that danger was. I knelt in front of him, placing my hands gently on his shoulders. "Son," I said softly, "I would protect you from anyone, anywhere, at any time. Fake officer, real officer, stranger, criminal, it doesn't matter. You're my child. That's all the reason I need." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the incident, a small, fragile smile appeared on his face. He leaned forward and hugged me, a long, tight hug that said everything he didn't know how to say in words. I held him until his breathing steadied and the weight in his chest eased. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood and across the HOA board. The real HOA president, who had been unaware of the fake officer's escalating behavior, came to our house personally the next morning. She apologized repeatedly, hands shaking, eyes full of genuine remorse. She promised an emergency meeting would be held immediately. "This never should have happened," she said. "We trusted the wrong person. We let someone with no authority pretend he had power just because he wanted it." Within 24 hours, the HOA voted unanimously to remove the entire fake security program that man had created. They shredded the phony citations he issued, banned him permanently from the neighborhood, and replaced every system he touched. Real security protocols were installed, with real background checks and real accountability. Nothing like this would ever be allowed again. But more importantly, something changed among the neighbors, people who rarely spoke to each other before, who lived quietly, cautiously, afraid of drawing attention, now greeted each other openly. They talked, shared concerns, created a support system. For the first time, the community felt united, not controlled. That weekend, several families gathered outside on the lawn. Kids played soccer, parents chatted, laughs echoed down the street. My son rode his bike again, a little slower than before, a little cautious but smiling. Every few minutes he glanced at me to make sure I was watching. I always was. One neighbor approached me with a cup of coffee and said, "You didn't just protect your son, you saved this neighborhood from living under fear." I didn't see myself as a hero. I didn't need praise. What I did wasn't extraordinary to me. It was instinct. It was duty. It was what any parent, any protector would do. But it felt good to know the neighborhood finally understood the cost of silence and the value of standing together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds, I looked at my son laughing with the other children. Life had returned to the street. Peace had returned to the community. And the man who tried to terrorize my child finally learned the lesson every bully eventually learns. Some people bend, some break, but some never break at all, especially not the child of a Navy SEAL.